Hi, today I'm going to talk about movies versus animation that you create by moving a layer and switch layers and frame by frame layers to hopefully explain the difference between these things. So first let me just load up a movie, and I already created this movie with a different technique in Anime Studio. Now this loaded up here, and it looks kind of like an image, but it's not really an image. It's a set of images. And when I select this layer, if you look in the Tools palette, there's not too much you can do with it. You can move the entire layer, and you can do all kinds of layer things that basically you can do with any object in Anime Studio, and you can change the camera. And there's some special things like you can track through the video, you can track a point, and you can crop, but that's about all you can do. But of course, as I click on the play button, the movie will run through and you see an animation. Now in this case the ball falls down. But what if I wanted the ball to move up? Well, Anime Studio, if you go to the layer, the movie layer, and click on the ellipsis, it will bring up the layer settings. If you click on the image, you can click on play backwards and click on apply. Now, as I click on the button, the ball actually goes up. I also have a lot of other things that you can try and play around with, like, for example, loop the movie indefinitely. That way, when I click apply and I play it, it will keep looping. So even though I only have a short loop for this 1 second, I could go for any amount of time and it would continue to run this looping over and over again. But an important thing I want you to see here is there are no keyframes in the timeline. So as an animator, I actually didn't do anything. I had a movie, and then I can control certain attributes like going forward or backwards or looping and that kind of thing. But I don't really have any keyframes that I'm actually causing this animation to do anything. It's all happening kind of magically when I clicked on the right buttons and checkboxes here. Okay, now let me show you how I actually created that animation. So what I did was I set my project settings just by File, Project Settings. And I set the width and height, and the frame rate here I set to 12 frames per second. And I did that because I'm going to show you something about switch layers, and I didn't want to have too many frames. Normally you'd have 24 or 30 frames per second, but here I'm just using 12. Now all I did was make sure my fill and stroke were set, and I just went over here and selected the circle. Now look over here and you can hold the Shift and Alt, and by doing that I can then just hold those and click in the middle and drag to make a little circle. Now it's important to notice that I'm on frame 0. You can set that you can draw on other frames, but by default it'll draw only on frame 0, and that's what you want. Now all I'm going to do is set my timeline marker to the 12th frame. And so I'm going to zoom out a little bit and move the screen up just a bit, and I'm going to drag the entire layer down. Now I could drag the points, I can do any number of different things, but in this case I'm just going to drag the layer. So I click on the layer transform, and I'm now going to press Shift and left click and drag the ball down. The Shift makes sure that it doesn't move to any direction. It just goes vertically. See, if I don't have Shift, it'll kind of move around wherever. But if I have Shift, it can only go in one direction. Now I can do it vertically or horizontally depending upon which way I start. But so I'm going to move the ball down, so at the end of 1 second the ball will wind up there. Now as soon as I let go of the mouse, it creates a keyframe. And here we're having linear interpolation, so it will go smoothly one frame and the other after the other the same amount, and you can change that to a number of different things that I'm not going to get into right now, but these are different ways that can give you different animation styles. So now let me rewind the animation by clicking on the step back here and click on the play button, and the ball falls down. So let me just show you some basic things about the animation. If I press the Alt button and right click, then that changes this blue shading, and that's how long your animation will run. So if I let the timeline marker, you'll see that shows how long the animation runs. Now if I press the control button and left click, I have the ending point, right click. If I left click, it's the start point, and if I right click, it's the end point. And let me show you that a little bit here between those keyframes, and you can see that way if you were looking on a very specific part that you were trying to work on, that's what you would do. So that's the control with the left and right click. So for simple motions, you can just use the layer and make it move. Now let's zoom in a little bit and see what's happening. Now if you remember, I just drew the circle on frame 0. That's the only thing that I drew, and then I didn't even draw anything later on. I just told it that I wanted the ball to show up down below the TV frame. The program itself, Anime Studio, realized that, okay, well, I'm going to move that ball, so if I wanted to move it from 0 to 12 and I'm going to do it in linear steps, then on frame 1 the ball has to be in this position, and on frame 2 it has to be there, and frame 3 and 4 and 5, and so the program itself is moving that layer. And if you use vectors, it actually moves those points, and so it's as if it's drawing a new picture each time. So I'm not actually saying it's drawing one, it's doing this all mathematically to move these points. But traditional animation is just flipping one picture after the other. And see, that's what I'm trying to express, is a movie is a series of pictures one after the other, and yet we didn't actually have to create a movie to create this animation. We just needed to create the keyframes based upon a particular vector. Okay, so let me show this a little bit more and relate it to a movie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File and say Export Animation, and I'm going to do my frame 1 to frame 12, and I'm going to export it to MP4. That would create the movie. However, this time I'm just going to do something a little different. I'm going to create an image sequence. And as I create the image sequence, I can select whichever styles that I want. I'm going to go ahead and use PNG right here. Now, after I select OK, it'll bring me to whatever directory that I want, and I can navigate wherever I want, and I'm going to save these pictures, and I'm just going to call it Untitled. Now what will happen is it calculates those and actually saves those images. Now if we look at that directory, we see that it created a whole bunch of images, and now I'm going to import those back into Anime Studio. So I just select File, Import, and Image. Now I'm going to select all the images except for the black one and say Open, and they all get imported. And here's what it looks like. You see all of these images. They're just like bitmap pictures. Now notice the icon that we have over here. It looks exactly the same as the movie. So just by clicking on it you might not be able to tell that, but here I've selected the movie and I can see my tools. It looks like a movie here. If I click on one of the images, it looks different. It doesn't look like a movie, and that's the bitmap. Let me just kind of click on these things and show you that each one is an individual photograph, if you will, a picture. So these pictures are the kinds of things that if you have a video camera or whatever, you may be able to generate these still images from your movie. But the key point is these images are just individual images within a whole sequence that makes up a movie. So they're not movies, they're different. But let's use switch layers and show how we can take these images and create something that looks like a movie. So what I'm going to do is select the first one and select the last, press Shift and select the last one. So I've selected all of them. Now I'm going to come over here and select Group with Selection. So if you have Anime Studio Pro 11, then you can do this. I think the earlier ones you can't group with selection, but you can just put them in a switch layer. That's not a problem. And in fact, let me just show you that a little bit. I'm going to group some of them like that and say Group with Selection. And so it creates a layer. I'm just going to call this Movie. And so all of them are put under that group layer, and I can just take these other ones and grab them and drag them underneath that movie. So you can do that in Debut and the other Anime Studio versions. So now the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to click on this, right click on it, and convert to switch. So now it's a switch layer. Now I didn't have to do it that way. I could have created a switch layer from the beginning and then just drag things in there, but I'm just showing you a different way to do it. Now notice something here. Now that I've put them in a switch layer, notice that I'm not seeing all of the balls anymore. I'm only seeing one image, and that happens to be this last one. But if I right click on the movie and click on a different image, I will see a different one. Okay, so what the switch layer is saying is I can select any of these images, and they could be anything, and it's only going to show one of them at a time. So now let me click on play and see what happens. Well, basically nothing, and that's because there are no keyframes. So a switch layer is not really a movie, it's just allowing you to select between a bunch of different images. So in a switch layer, there's really no kind of direction that it's moving. It's not moving left or right or up or down. It's not going forward or backward. It's just a container for these images. But how can we make it look like a movie? Well, remember, this was kind of taken from a movie. It was taken, it was an animation, and that animation I rendered as a movie. If you remember, it was this Untitled one that's created a movie, but it was actually this animation that created all of that. So if we wanted to make it look like the ball was moving up, if we would look at the pictures, and 11 it's at the bottom, 10 it's a little bit higher, 9, so it going from the top down, kind of ironically, the ball is moving up. So if I wanted to make it look like it was falling down, I would start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The reason that is because that's actually how I created the animation. If you remember, it started at the top and then came down. Again, if I select on 1, again, if I click on play, it's not going to do a movie. I have to actually tell it which images to put out there. So how would I do that? Well, let me go to, I would do is go to the first frame and tell it on the first frame, put the first image. So I can right click, need to click on the switch layer, and now select the first image. So now what it does is it creates a keyframe here on the first frame, and what that means is it's going to say on the first frame the program is going to do something, and what it's going to do is it's going to make this first image show up. Then I would go to the second frame and right click and select image number 2. Notice now that second keyframe has shown up. Now this one's kind of long, and it just means that this image will stay in place for that whole time. So as I move my time marker, you'll see that's what happens. Now it's at the bottom just because by default at frame 0 it's 11, but I can change that to 1, and now you see it looks the same as frame 1. Now I'm going to go to frame 3, and I could right click on here, but I can also select this tool here and just select it that way. And then go to frame 4 and just keep doing that for all the images. So let's kind of show what we've got so far. See, the ball falls partway down. Why does it stop? Is because I don't have any more keyframes here. So now when I have all the keyframes completed, the movie loop shows the ball falling down. Now what if I want the ball to move up? Well, I can't really run the timeline backwards. And do you remember for the movie, when I had the movie, I could click on the ellipsis and I could say image, and now I could say play backwards. Well, on the switch layers, there isn't an image tab, and that's because a switch layer isn't really a movie. It's just a switch layer. It's just a folder that allows you to select one of several things, and so there's no playing forward or playing backwards. But the layers in the switch layer are images. So, you know, if I click on that one and I look at the image tab, well, we see all of the things that are about a movie. You can't do anything with the image because you can't really play an image. An image is just a picture. It's not multiple pictures. Okay, so again, how do I run it backwards? Well, it's all about the keyframes. The keyframes are telling us which picture I'm going to show in. So if I wanted to go backwards, instead of putting the first layer first, I should have put the 11th one first. And so how can I deal with that? Well, let me go ahead and expand by pressing Alt and right-clicking on the timeline. Remember, we showed that to make our space bigger. And so now all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag these keyframes. Now it can get a little bit confusing because these things look like exposure times, but let me just make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to take one and I'll drag it way over here. Now I'm going to take two and I'll drag it just close to the other one so it looks like a dot. And then the next one, a 3, and drag it and make it look like a dot, and a 4 and drag it, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and let's see what we have. We have 8. Got to get 9. Where's 9? Oh yeah, there's 9. So let's move the 10 over here a little bit. Now move the 9, 8, 9, then 10, and then 11. Okay, so what we have is that if we look at the switch layer as I move the timeline, you'll see that the images are selected. Probably the easiest way to show that is click on this special tool and it'll show up here. And as I move the timeline marker, you'll see that the images change. And so from frame 0 all the way to frame 26. At 26 it changes to 11, but all the other frames it's image 1. And then at frame 27 it's 10, 9, 8. So that's how you can see which of these things. Sometimes the tooltip can help, but this is the most reliable way here. So this is really kind of like the exposure time. It might take a little practice to get used to that, but that's what's happening. So well, let me go to frame 0 and make sure that that starts off with 11. Okay, so now we're at 11 all the way until we get to frame 27. Now you usually don't count frame 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag all of these, select them all, and then drag them all down to frame 1. And what will happen is it looks like it's going up. So now we're running our movie in reverse, if you will. Okay, so let's show that by clicking on the play, and you see it's running in reverse. But a key point to know is in the switch layer, there's not really anything running in forward or backwards or anything. It's just where we decided to put those pictures. And again, I can go ahead and delete all those. So to make it run in reverse, I can just start with it at 11, and then frame 2 I'll say at 10, frame 3 it's 9, and so we can see we get it going up. But I don't have to do it that way. I can do it any way I want. I can go to frame 1 and let's make it 4, and then frame 2 let's make it 10, and then frame 3 let's make it 9, and frame 4 let's make it 8, and then let's go back to 10 again, and then how about to 1, and then how about then to 11. And what'll happen is it'll just kind of seem to be doing kind of goofy things, just going wherever. So it's not about moving in a particular direction, it's about selecting which picture you want to show. So the switch layer is all about just showing a particular picture. Now let me show you something else about scripts. Anime Studio Scripts.com has a lot of scripts that can be helpful. Some of them may be older, but there's one that's a good one to show for switch layers, and it's called the loop switch. And that's a good one to use for these switch layers for this kind of movie type of thing. So right here, what I'm going to do is I've gotten rid of all of the keyframes. I've deleted all of them. So now I'm going to go to scripts, and I have mine put in my layer effects, and it's called, I call it key switch layers. and for starting on frame 1 to frame 12, and we're going to include the top layer. I'm not going to reverse the switch keys, and I'm going to press OK. Now what it does is it runs it in the normal direction. So all that script did was just automatically do what I just showed you manually. So it just does it automatically. So I'm going to delete all of those keyframes and go back to the switch and keyframe layers and reverse it this time and click on OK. Now it runs it in reverse. So I'm not going to really go into scripts very much. You just you'll have to look online and find out how to use those, but that just is an easy way to do this movie kind of technique. Okay, so now let's compare this to frame by frame that's in the new Anime Studio Pro 11. So I'm going to go here and select frame by frame. You should always make sure you're on frame 0 before you do that. So now this is actually a switch layer, but it has a different look to it. If you look in there, you see there's a layer in there. And by the way, notice that the layer that's in there is a vector layer. You can have any kind of layer within a switch layer. All a switch layer is going to do is allow you to select between one thing or another. So you can have characters in there, you can have images, you can have movies, and it just allows you to pick one or the other. However, like a movie is a special kind of switching in which I'm going from one image to the next, to the next, to the next. Well, frame by frame is a useful special kind of switch layer in which I typically am going to be drawing like with a pencil. You don't have to, but that's the typical kind of idea. Okay, so let me prove to you that this is a switch layer just like the normal one. It just has some special helps. Like I said, it's got these frames that you can add new frames, and we'll talk about that. But let's click on the layer settings. If we go to switch, notice it has this checkbox, frame by frame drawing. Now if I unclick that and select apply, it becomes a switch layer. So it's just a normal switch layer at that point. Look over here and you see there's these special buttons have gone away. If I click on frame by frame drawing, watch what will happen here and happen over here. When I click on apply, this becomes frame by frame, and you've got these special buttons over here. Okay, so let's talk about those special buttons. These buttons in frame by frame are really about the traditional style of animation where I draw one picture after the other, after the other, after the other. And so it just has some special helps to make that easier. And so clicking on plus creates a frame, clicking on the minus deletes one, you can duplicate them, and this number over here tells you kind of the spacing that's going to be between your images. Right now it's set for 2 frames. You can set it to whatever you want. Okay, so now let's revisit what we were doing with the animation before. So I'm going to close this up because we're here at frame 0. Now I'm going to click on the plus, and typically what this is all about is drawing pictures. So I might, let's click on the pencil this time, and I'm going to have auto weld and auto close and auto fill and stroke and those kinds of things. Now I'm going to draw a circle, and then I'm going to click on the plus and draw the circle in another position. Click on the plus, draw the circle in another position, and just continue doing that until I have as many frames as I want, and I click on the play and I have this animation. Now these are crude quick drawings, but the value of frame by frame is that you can draw anything that you want and do traditional style animation. I don't have to draw with the pencil. I could use the circle tool just like I did originally, and I click on the plus to start my frames off, and shift and alt, and I draw my little circle here, and then I click on the plus, and notice that it went away. So yeah, because I'm going to draw another circle in another position, and I can make that circle go wherever I want it to go, to do whatever I want and become any size I want, and so the animation can do anything I want it to do. Now notice what's not happening. What's not happening is that I'm not animating in the style that I did originally, where I dragged the layer or I can manipulate points and vectors. So that's kind of a different style of animation. It's more like the switch layer when I switch between images. It's just that I'm creating these images on the fly in Anime Studio. So let me kind of try to summarize here the differences between these things. In the traditional type of or the animation that the Anime Studio is most famous for or most powerful with, you create keyframes. So here, for example, all I did was create one keyframe for the layer and the ball fell. Now, of course, that ball could have been positioned anywhere. Oops, let me undo that and go back to the layer. And that ball could have been positioned anywhere. So it didn't have to fall straight down, and it can go wherever I want it to go, and it can do any number of things like change its size or shape and all different kinds of things like that. So it doesn't have to be doing one particular thing. But what we're not doing is drawing over and over and over. We're drawing kind of once and then manipulating the points as time goes on. Now, in Anime Studio you can include movies, but those are not things that you're really creating the content, not within Anime Studio anyway. You can manipulate it to run forward or backward, but it's just a movie. Now the switch layer is like a movie, but it kind of gives you more access to the guts of it, the internals, which is a whole bunch of pictures. And you can, again, go to put those pictures in any order that you want. You don't have to show them in a particular order. You can do them however you want. But the movie and the switch layer are similar in the sense that you're showing one picture and then another picture. You're not manipulating the points, really. You're just selecting one picture or the other. And the frame by frame, again, it's like a switch layer, and the difference there, the real difference between that and switch layer, is that you're really creating the content on the fly in Anime Studio. So hopefully that helps you understand the differences between movies, the way that Anime Studio typically does things with bones and moving vector points and things like that, moving layers, frame by frame, and switch layers. Hopefully that's helpful.